fostering mutual respect, reducing likelihood of military confrontation, safeguarding open and secure waterways for all nations. However, despite its intention, the COC faces numerous legal challenges that limits its effectiveness in addressing complex realities in the South China Sea disputes. One of the main issues challenging the COC is the scope of application. The ones that I argue that this is the main hindrance that makes the COC probably will never be in reality. As I mentioned before, the scope of application is the most contentious element. It serves as a foundation for cooperation because we're talking about the area. Yeah, and the COC was designed to establish guidelines that promotes peaceful conduct and prevent conflicts over contested waters. Yeah. However, the practical implementation of the COC is hindered, defining its geographic and jurisdictional reach, leading to legal and diplomatic challenges that complicate its effectiveness. Yeah. So when we're talking about the scope of application, there's a complexity in the scope of definition, the inclusion of non-claimant states, and the challenges to the scope of application. Now let's see one by one. Yeah. So in the scope of definition, it is not clear where is this so-called COC will be applied. Yeah. So we're talking about on China's version, they were talking about the whole area of South China Sea, whereas the other countries were talking about, okay, those who are only within the overlapping claims. So this is something that really unsolvable in the near future because everybody's looking at the different perspectives. Yeah, this ambiguity, of course, will affecting on the law enforcement and surveillance. Yeah, because as a law enforcement in the coastal state, they will think which are areas that they actually have their jurisdiction. They are not talking about in the international waters, but they're their own sovereign rights jurisdiction. Whereas China will include everything in the area. Okay. So again, in the absence of a shared understanding of boundaries, undermines the COC's ability to prevent conflicts. Yeah. Again, conflicts will be there as long as we're not agreeing on the scope of the definition. Secondly, as I mentioned before, this conflict is not only having the interest of the bordering states, but also other states that are not claiming, especially the country that have an interest in the navigational routes, where the United States always adamant to uphold the freedom of navigations, because the United States believes that, as I mentioned before, there is an international waters within the South China Sea. Yeah. So with this kind of interest, the Code of Conduct itself cannot exclude the non-claimant states such as the United States. If they are making limitation on the area, it has to be also heard with the perspective of the non-claimant states like the US. The involvement of the external powers, so it highlights a critical tension. So should the COC only regulate the conduct of the claimant states, or should it also impose the limitation of non-claimant state operating in the region? So this kind of decision, it's so critical, so that I don't think, again, this make an easy for the country that negotiating the COC. Whenever the US presence there, the Chinese Navy will also enhance their presence in the area. In fact, the Chinese Navy already occupied a number of the reclaimed area in the South China Sea. Lastly, challenges to the scope of application, as you can see here. So if there's interest on the Red Sea resource, so we were going to be a bit of absurd which are the area. Yeah, if we're talking about each of the state claim, yeah, then it will be uh, let's say easier to be based on UNCLOS, yeah, rather than to put in a mix what the Chinese has claimed. Yeah. Because if you put the Chinese claim with the red lines over here, it makes everyone's claims would be vague. Yeah. So the scope of application is not merely a technical or legal matters, but also an indicative of deeper strategic and ideological divides between the claimant and the non-claimant states. And coming from these difficulties, like I mentioned before, the latest development that coming from our president is that on the 9th of November, Indonesia made a joint statement saying that we will work together on uh, on the possibility of making a joint development on the areas of overlapping claims. So this phrase is really troubling because Indonesia at all this time, yeah, has never ever acknowledged that we have a dispute on the South China Sea. With this kind of joint statement, it means Indonesia now is actually part of the dispute, saying that we are acknowledging China's claim there. Yeah. So starting from the 9th of November, it creates a stir of discussion. Yeah. Including myself, I have to write in the national media saying that this is absurd, this is very controversial, and Indonesia need to revisit its joint statement. Joint statement is not a legally binding document, but in international relations, when you announce it between the head of the state and in front of the formal settings, it creates a moral obligations. Yeah. Interestingly, few days after that, he went to the US. Okay? And this is something that we really wait of not the joint statement. What would he make the joint statement with the opposite of China? And as predicted, he made the joint statement with was contradict with the previous joint statement. He said that Indonesia is upholding UNCLOS and we don't have any overlapping ties with China. So this is showing that the delegation have made a mistake in drafting the joint statement. Again, this is not a legally document. This is not a legally document, yeah, binding, but it creates, let's say, ammunition for China, saying that look, Indonesia is not the one claimant states acknowledging our claims. So it strengthened China's position in the next maybe few years on, because China will try to push Indonesia to work on the table. We have agreed upon this one. Now you have to follow the one that you have already committed to. Despite that it's not legally binding, but politically, and I cannot deny that Indonesia have a number of economic ties with China, that it creates our leverage is lowering down. So as a final remarks, again, to address this challenge, the COC should or could benefit from the explicit definition, to geographic scope and more precise guidelines regarding the participation of the non-claim states. However, such clarity requires delicate negotiations to ensure all parties agree to and abide by the terms. Given the situation that I have mentioned before, I don't think that this would be the ideal reality. Yeah. Without a shared understanding of the COC's reach, enforcement remains weak or even unbalanced powers, between China and the rest of the countries in the region, and the risk of misunderstanding and conflicts remains high. We are not denying that more and more countries in Southeast Asia focusing on their national budget to defense budget. I'm not quite adamant to this situation, but this is the ones that we have to deal with in the next few years. Thank you very much. Back to you, Michaela. Good morning.
It's a very
I'll be extending for no
controversial.
worries.
All right.
Now, thank you very much, Ari. That was very interesting, and I think our speakers are going to have a lot of questions at the end during the Q&A. Now, going to Mr. Adrianus Raman, our original first panelist. However, due to technical difficulties, we had to divert, and we thank you, Ari, very much for taking the lead. Now, our second panelist is Mr. Adrianus Ramon, an assistant professor of international law at the Faculty of Law at Catholic University of Bandung, Indonesia, where he also serves as the vice dean of the faculty. His research focuses on international humanitarian law and the law of the sea. Adrianus began his academic career in 2017 after 9 years of diplomatic service with the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He holds law degrees from the University of Indonesia and the University of Queensland, Australia. He has participated in numerous short courses, academic conferences, and workshops, and has served as a resource person for various training events convened by the Indonesian government and the ICRC delegate in Indonesia. Adrianus has authored several articles on the law of the sea and international air law, and co-authored books on public international law and refugee law. Today, he will discuss the need to establish guidelines for the prevention of dangerous activities in overlapping maritime claim areas. Welcome, Adrianus.
Okay. Am I audible already?
We can hear you and we can see you. That's great.
Okay. Thank you very much, and a very good morning for everyone. And thank you for providing me with this opportunity to be connected with you guys through online from Bandung, Indonesia. And thank you so much also to the organizer and to fellow spokespersons, also fellow presenters, Pak Ali, who also one of my seniors actually during my university years. It's an honor and a privilege to be sharing panels with you, Pak Ali, in this forum. And uh, and it seems that the South China Sea issues have become one of the most intriguing uh, focus of the Indonesian scholars with regard to international law. And in my research is actually inspired from the incidents, but I'm trying to speak from a more general approach and hoping for the incidents in the overlapping maritime claims area. So again, the inspiration coming from the developments that occur in the South China Sea for the past couple of years, where one of the claimant states have become more aggressive in a way, deployed vessels, and also involved in a more physical incidents with their fellows claimant states. So that's why I'm proposing for an alternative for to prevent any incidents that might escalate. I'm sorry, the weather is not very good here, and there is a thunderstorm outside. So I'm very sorry. The connection might not be perfect. Okay. The presentation will follow the guide flow that I'll talk a bit on the overlapping maritime claims, and I will see the previous uh, examples of a non-binding arrangement that might serve as an alternative solution in cases where a binding legal instrument is difficult to be achieved, to be established between states. And I will consider how the guidelines that might be useful for preventing escalating incidents in overlapping claims area might be useful, and also we'll see what's the substance that might be needed in those guidelines. So obviously, I think Pak Ali have just showed you the audience the left-hand side maps. Indeed, that's the South China Sea maps, and and the the idea is why there is no overlapping claims. Obviously, for the two maps in right-hand side, it's just because of the geographical conditions of the coastal states. The upper side of the map is for adjacent coastal state where they unable to agree upon the projections of their boundary lines, and the lower maps is in Singapore and for Indonesia, where the distance of the Strait of Singapore and the water between the island of Singapore and the island of Batam of Indonesia is less than the twice of the maximum breadth of the territorial sea allowed by UNCLOS. So yeah, obviously, process of demarcation is needed. But the left-hand side, as what have been explained by Pari, is where states or states for that particular issue try to impose their excessive unilateral claims without any consideration for the international law provisions or even on how the royalty, UNCLOS have regulated Article 15, where UNCLOS stipulated the demarcation process using the equidistance or immediate line principles. However, when they talk about the exclusive economic zones and the continental shelf, Article 74 and 83 of UNCLOS only regulated that the states, the claimant states, to achieve an equitable solutions agreement. So again, we should not be able to guess or to predict the actual time for delimiting a maritime boundary, and and this is also because of the way of state normally prefer to settle the delimitation process using negotiations, where they can have the full control of the actual process and not to rely on third party judicials or third party settlement in settling their maritime delimitations. Experts have considered that there are several factors that might be influential in for achieving a success in negotiation process in terms of maritime limitations: political, strategic, historical factors, economic, environmental, geographic, and when it all mixed into one, it could make a very complicated, and in the end it could be prolong the entire process. And in the time being, UNCLOS does not prohibit the state, the coastal states, the claimant coastal states, to deploy vessels, naval vessels, or with law enforcement vessels in the area. Uh, and most of the examples that could be seen in practices, the claimant states indeed deploying their naval vessels, mostly for conducting law enforcement operations. Um, Experts have considered that as if the deployment should be acceptable as long as it's based on the state's rights over the maritime zone, is adhere on the principle of non-use of force, pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter, and it adhered and to observe any specific agreement or other provisions that established before the delimitation process is being conducted. However, there are examples of this is two pictures that I took from online, where the deployment of state vessels in the overlapping maritime trading area could resulted to incidents. Um, in both incidents, it is fortunately that the incidents do not was not escalated into open conflict. However, from the tendency and from the numbers that being published by the Philippines authority, it seems that there is an increase of incidents over the past couple of years, and that's become quite concerning for even including for Indonesia. I believe that again, even though we are not a claimant state, even though we are not actually involved in the dispute over the maritime beaches, yet we are located in the one of the closest proximity from the actual disputed area. So I believe Indonesia should also be very concerned about the escalation of the violence in South China Sea area. So this is the background and the idea of why national dispute is being conducted. Of course, indeed, UNCLOS have also provided a provisional interim solutions. Article 74.3 and 83 paragraph 3 of UNCLOS provided the provision for a provisional arrangement pending to the actual final limitations. However, for achieving one, it requires a certain level of good faith as well as certain level of good relations. Um, and it needs to be supported by all stakeholders domestically to achieve the success in establishing such provisional arrangements. Indonesia and Malaysia has succeeded in establishing one example of this type of arrangement, provisional arrangement for joint somewhat achieve its goals, its functions, yet other critics also said that it's actually not enough. And when we look on the level of incident, the level of violence that's happening in South China Sea, I honestly believe that it will be very difficult, if it's not impossible, to achieve of such provisional arrangement for law enforcement uh, uh, operations in the overlapping trade area because of the level of good faith is not there, and not to mention that the level of good relation between the United States when we talk about the South China Sea dispute, and this is why when looking on the examples of past practices by states, I look upon several non-binding arrangements uh, that have served as a reference. Again, this is a non-binding, but is being established by experts. But it somewhat achieve its goals and function in become reference to of state practices in filling the gap, in filling the legal loopholes uh, due to one exclusive personality. One example of that is the guidelines for navigations and overflight of EEZ established in 2006, no, or 2005. So it's guidelines by academicians and high-ranking officials in their personal capacity. So this why I highlight and I bold these terms because this is very important. That even though the officials might held a position or uh, an office in their respective countries, but when they involve in the groups, when they discuss the guidelines, they should act as in their personal capacity as in individuals. And the guidelines provide principles, the general principle of common understanding on how military forces and the intelligence should operate in the EEZ of other states. So this is the guidelines is actually explaining the ambiguous terms of Article 58 of UNCLOS, where there is actually a debate, a dispute whether uh, foreign military forces could doing training in other states EZ. It somewhat serve as the guidelines, non-binding guidelines, uh, and it succeeded in establishing those in 2006, I think. So another examples of again a non-binding legal instruments that established by academicians, by experts, by practitioners is the Sublime Amendments on international law applicable to the armed conflict at sea, drafted between 1988 and 1994. It's filling the legal gap that left by the fact that the the newest um, legal instruments that regulated the means and method of warfare, naval warfare, is the 1907 Decree Conventions. The 1949 Geneva, Second Geneva Conventions is regulated on the protections of the victims of the naval warfare. It's not really touching the issues of how the international armed conflict at sea is being regulated, to be conducted, so the means and method of warfare. The additional protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention 1977 also didn't actually provide provisions with regard to the naval warfare. So that's why in 1988, a group of experts and also practitioners of naval warfare, in again in their personal capacity, supported by examples of past practices, I'm contemplating on how if to propose these guidelines for preventing incidents. And I consider that during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union have established several legal instruments that try to prevent them to actually point for an open conflicts. There are at least two legal instruments that I try to look on as a reference in looking on the substance to be proposed on what how or what the guidelines should have provisions. And also I am looking on the Colorado Conventions and a code for unplanned insolvency established in 2014 again uh, by experts and practitioners. Just one note that actually uh, there is a proposal when President Biden have first come into office in the United States, a proposal or actually an idea on the United States to establish an agreement with China to avoid incident at sea. However, it's the idea or proposal is heavily rejected because some practitioners and also scholars consider that by establishing such an agreement, it should, again, as in Indonesia case, could be construed as we recognizing the claim, the excessive claim of China over the disputed area. So I think that's also become one of the idea to support that probably if the establishment of the legally binding legal instrument is too difficult, is too problematic, uh, we also could consider that establishing a non-legally binding legal instrument at least to serve as a reference to prevent any unwanted escalation over the overlapping that area. Uh, Another note that I look on the legal instrument established by the United States and Soviet Union, it it I think intentionally omit the involvement of Coast Guard forces vessels or naval paramilitary, which I believe should also be included in such guidelines, because again, when we look on the examples of incidents in South China Sea, in particular, we will see a significant numbers of Coast Guard vessels or the involvement of naval paramilitary, not necessarily as much as the actual naval forces. So to be able to be operated or to be able to be useful to actually finding its goal, the guidelines should also be applied or implemented towards the Coast Guard and naval paramilitary. So there is a significant. I try to listed a list of substance that should included or adapted in the guidelines, not to be interested toward the formation of another state vessels and evading not to conducting evading maneuvers in areas of substantial navigations and so on. So again, I believe this guidelines, a non-binding legal instrument, should be considered as a reference, as an alternative solution when we look on the actual condition of the South China Sea, that to establish a legally binding legal instrument is very difficult, and an escalation of the conflict could be coming
you very much, Andreas. Uh, Very insightful and very interesting. Later on in Q&A, I believe that our students will have a lot of questions as well. Now, can you all hear? Yeah, great. Now, moving on to our last speaker, Jacqueline Joyce Espanilla. She is an assistant professor at the University of Philippines College of Law, where she teaches courses on public international law and New Zealand law. She concurrently serves as a senior fellow at the University of the Philippines Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea. Jacqueline is also the chairperson of the International Law Department of the Philippines Judicial Academy, a legal consultant for the National Security Council, and a regular resource person for the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Special Senate Committee on Philippines Maritime and Admiralty Zones. Previously, she was a senior attorney at the Philippines Department of Justice and a legal consultant at the ASEAN Development Bank Office of the General Counsel. Her research interests include fisheries, maritime biodiversity governance, ocean regime complexes, and the management of global commons resources. Jacqueline will be presenting Unpacking the Maritime Security Implications of the WTO Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies for the Southeast Asian region. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much for having me, and I apologize that I could not be there with you in person. Just to confirm, can everybody hear me? I always have to ask this because you never know. Technology tends to fail you exactly at the most crucial moment. Thank you. I see a thumbs up in the audience, so I take that to be a very good sign. So one hurdle down. May I please have the authority to share my screen, please? I do have some slides for you. So my laptop heard me and now refuses to share my screen. Okay, let me see if this works better. No idea. Okay, I'm so sorry for this. This does not seem to be working out too well. Okay, I see it. I hope. Can't share screen. It says can't share screen. Okay. All right, so I don't want to impose on your time any more than I have to with using these crucial moments to troubleshoot, so I will just have to wing it. And unfortunately, all you have to focus on is me, if that is okay with everybody.
We also have your slides if you want us to present them.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, that's perfect. So please, I would appreciate if you could share my slides, please.
Share your screen.
I think with the arrow. Yeah. Arrow to share screen. Do you see the slides?
Hang on. Yes, I do see it. Thank you. Could you please go into slideshow mode, please? And then I'll just indicate when to change the page. Thank you. All right, so the title of my presentation is, as you can see there, has nothing to do with dispute resolution, has nothing to do with de-escalation. And instead, I'm going to shift the room conversation a little bit and focus instead on the idea that the non-resolution of this sticky issue, the sticky problem that we have in the South China Sea, could present challenges to the proper implementation of other international law as intended. And the context that I'm specifically referring to here is the idea of disciplining the grant of fishery subsidies, which of course is a very important issue ongoing right now in the WTO. So in other words, what I will be talking about is not strictly confined to the law of the sea, but sort of its intersection with international trade law. Noting highest concern, particularly for coastal states, as many of the Southeast East Asian region states are. Second, I'll be talking about the highlights of the WTO Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies, the text of which was adopted in 2022 at MC12 of the WTO. There are ongoing negotiations at the moment for additions to this text, as I will discuss in my later slides. Excuse me. And third, I'll be talking about the potential relevance of the WTO AFS to the maritime security in the ASEAN region. The link here between these very, very diverse topics might not seem so apparent, but I hope in my presentation I'll show you precisely where it might bear some relevance. Next slide, please. All right, so just some fast fisheries facts. I think it's safe to say that all of us understand the importance of fish from a non-traditional security perspective. Fish consumption accounts for around 17% of the world's animal protein intake. The biggest consumers of fish are all found in Asia, but the second largest market for fish is Europe, collectively. So of course, bears some relevance to the present audience as well. Coastal communities are particularly at risk, with fish making up about 80% of the animal protein consumed. This again just highlights exactly why it should be of the highest concern for practically every country in the world, even those that are not coastal in nature. Global fish production is at around 179 million tons. And here when I say fish production, I actually refer to capture fisheries production. It's not reflected in this particular bit of data, but over the last, I'd say, 5 years, the fish production has actually been more or less divided between capture fisheries and aquaculture. Aquaculture sort of gaining ground on capture fisheries, possibly because it seems to be the lower hanging fruit, and considering that capture fisheries contains a whole lot of complex issues, costs and economic costs and political concerns. But again, I'll leave that aside for the moment. There are an estimated 59.51 million people who are engaged in the primary sector of fisheries and aquaculture. And this was in data in 2018. Since then, this has significantly increased, as I had hinted at a little bit earlier. The primary sector for fisheries here refers to those who are actually engaged in the actual capture of fish, the post-harvest processing of fish, and as you can imagine, this is a whole supply chain involving the various dimensions of this product. And it does represent a significant portion of the economy of many countries. So here, I again note that the total capture fisheries production reached the highest level ever at 96.4 million tons. So to simplify that number, it seems that the global appetite for fish, and not just fish, but all seafood products, seem to be at an all-time high and just getting higher. You can imagine that fish are certainly not a finite resource, and therefore this growing level of consumption is a little bit worrying, considering that the fish resource, the fish stocks, might not be able to keep up with the demand. At the bottom of the slide, you will note that while there are several countries who we can say are large consumers, and collectively, as I said, ASEAN is both a consumer and a producer, and the European Union is also a consumer and producer, we could note that China in particular, as a single nation, is and will continue to be the world's largest producer and consumer of fish. This will bear some relevance as I proceed with my discussion, noting that the Chinese fishing fleets operate not just in near shore, but are also the largest distant water fishing fleet in the world. So you can imagine, in order to satisfy the high demand for fish, they will be looking not just at near shore areas, but also in areas outside their jurisdiction. It could be in areas beyond national jurisdiction, such as the high seas, or perhaps in EEZs of elsewhere. Next slide, please. The other additional facts that I want to note is that with this increasing proportion of the world's marine fish stocks areas are already nearing irreversible depletion. This is what you may have heard termed as fisheries collapse. Updated data shows that already 36% of global fishing areas are already at this level. This is already beyond sustainable and is already in danger, or already imperiling livelihoods and the food security everywhere. Over 1/3 of global fish stocks are overfished or already biologically unsustainable levels, if you want a hard figure to the description I just mentioned. And if we want to bring it closer to my particular area of concern, my neighborhood of the world, the South China Sea has already lost an estimated 70 to 95% of its stocks. What was once one of the world's richest fishing grounds is practically no more. If to sound trite, this is concrete evidence of the tragedy of the commons, an area that is subject to such regulatory complexity due to overlapping claims that actually no regulation is happening for various political reasons. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing, and other fisheries crimes are major causes for this fisheries collapse, as you will see in a little while. But suffice to say that this is the premise that the WTO Fisheries Subsidies Agreement is sort of working on. This is sort of the factual backdrop of this new agreement. Next slide, please. Okay, sorry, my slides seem to have gotten all jumbled up in translation. So what are fishing subsidies? Fishing subsidies I guess in the simplest terms possible, refer to the giving of a financial contribution to actors so that they would behave in a certain way. It's a form of encouragement, in other words. And this encouragement can come in a number of forms. It can be, for example, actually outright grant of cash, money, to help support the activities. It could be in terms of tax write-offs, things that would sort of allow the operation of the activity with as little burden as possible because of the support granted by the government. So that's sort of a paraphrase of what a subsidy is. Now, the agreement on the fisheries subsidies provided by the WTO makes a direct reference to another WTO treaty. This is the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. In that other treaty, let's call it the SCM treaty, Article 1 of that instrument actually does provide a more elaborate definition of what a subsidy is. But it is non-specific in the sense that it can apply to any form of financial support that would result in a benefit to the actor that is being supported. The AFS, Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies, imported this idea and made it specific to marine wild capture fishing and marine and fishing-related activities at sea. In other words, you now have a situation wherein fishing effort, for example, fishing fleets that would go out into the open ocean, are able to do so for much longer and much farther because now they don't have to worry about operational costs because this is being sort of taken care of by their respective governments for whatever reason. Like I said, there are very many aspects to this. And once I go into the specific provisions of the AFS, you will see how exactly subsidies might actually play out. So it helps fishers to fish, if put differently. But the question here is, are all subsidies bad? The premise of the WTO AFS seems to sort of indicate that yes, it's bad, that's why we're disciplining them. But it's not as clear-cut as that. There may be certain situations where a subsidy is warranted for developmental purposes. Next slide, please. Okay, here, again, apologies for the formatting, but here are some examples of subsidies just to get a better visual or an idea of what this entire instrument is about. As I said, it can be something financial in nature, loans, grants, equity investments, tax credits. It can be actual physical support, anything that facilitates construction, the acquisition, maintenance, modernization, or renovation, or even the upgrading of vessels. Purchasing equipment, supplies, and this is quite controversial. Subsidies to purchase fuel, ice, or bait. Insurance, I mean, as you can imagine, it's practically any cost that is operational in nature that can now be sort of written off as something that the operator no longer has to worry about because somebody else is answering for it, the government in this case. Next slide, please. by Europe, 18% of the total. If you notice, this sort of tracks with what I said earlier about which areas of the world are the biggest fish consumers and the fish producers. This just shows, or sort of, this reinforces the idea of how significant fish and fisheries industries are that it would warrant this kind of subsidization or governmental support. North America trails by only having 13% of the total. But actually, the countries that give the highest amount of subsidies are China, 21% of the total allocated for the Asian region, the United States, and South Korea. This data, if you'll take it at face value, is representative perhaps of broad percentages of actual responsibility for subsidization. But at the outset, I'd like to point out something that a colleague at the FAO once said. Of all the areas of trade regulation, fisheries is actually, compared to agriculture, something wherein we are data poor. We don't have precise numbers, the estimates. And that also makes regulation and treaty sort of response a little bit difficult because you can't sort of have a clear picture because it's always fluid. The numbers are all fudged up sometimes and it's not entirely accurate. But this at least gives us a sense of where the problem might lie. Next slide, please. So you now have the WTO stepping into a regulatory area, which, if you think about it, isn't necessarily top of mind when you think of international trade issues. This actually represents the first purely or mostly environmental in nature agreement of the WTO. And it has, in fact, been in discussions at WTO for more than 2 decades. So in 2001, as early as 2001, this has already been discussed during the Doha round, and thereafter in a couple of iterations of the WTO meetings. The way that the AFS was negotiated was sort of occurring in fits and starts. Some years it was top of mind and there's always this great push, let's talk about it, let's get down to it and negotiate provisions. And there are years where there was no mention or it was very low priority. I guess we could say that we had a turning point in 2016 wherein the Sustainable Development Goals were concluded and there was a specific target there, SDG 14.6, that specifically asked the world to address this issue of fishing subsidies, noting how much it links or is a factor in the global fisheries collapse. So that sort of got the ball rolling and then we had a lot of progress. Until finally in 2022 at MC12, despite COVID, despite all those issues that sort of derailed the process, we finally adopted the WTO AFS. It's a highly political instrument. Not everybody was happy, and that tends to be the case when you have compromised treaties. But the point of the matter is we now have this basic instrument, which would thereafter be the basis for working towards more specific disciplines. And then this was indeed the spirit of it. So in 2020, earlier this year, in MC13, there was a discussion to have sort of an amendment to the adopted text in 2022. Unfortunately, that didn't quite work out, but again, there's an undertaking to continue negotiating. So onwards, we're going to try to sort of lock down these very key provisions that are still left unsaid in the existing AFS. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to draw your attention quickly on this slide to what I mentioned earlier about SDG 14.6, just to remind everybody, again, sort of the mandate or the marching orders granted to all countries, and that is to prohibit certain forms of fishery subsidies that contribute to overcapacity and overfishing and eliminate subsidies that contribute to IUU fishing, recognizing that appropriate
Disconnected?
Yes.
Oh no.
We
Still
can.
starting the meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Come on.
Just.
Hello.
Hello? Do you hear us?
No.
We cannot. If you cannot hear us. But we can hear her. It's good if you can from her. Open it. Their settings. Okay, that's fine. As long as no, she can speak, but she cannot hear us.
Can you write in the comments there so she knows maybe? I only have a card, but I don't have a phone.
Um, okay. You can hear me, I guess. Okay, I'm not so sure. That's better. All right.
Yes, yes, right.
Okay. I can't hear you, but I can read your messages. So I'm happy to proceed whenever you're ready. And I just hope for my slides to be shown again, please.
Yeah. Present?
No, but let's put it for the new release.
I can present class.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, I can't open the microphone. I don't know. I can set the link. Oh, it's opening there. Can you hear me?
Okay.
No, no, no. With yours. With that?
Oh, but it's opening here, but but you can
No
see my
worries.
slides.
Would you like us to do the presentation while we're trying to work on solutions?
Then
Sure. So,
you can share the screen. You can share the screen.
But it's too much.
yeah.
Can you come outside the microphone?
Should I present? Should I go ahead and present even without the slides?
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Bear in mind for a second. Let me just check where I am. Right. All right. So before we were cut off, I was mentioning that the SDG target 14.6 was sort of the catalyst and sort of the marching orders to the global community at large to really double down their efforts and work on the conclusion of the EMS. And indeed, that sort of worked because in MC22, they were able to adopt the text of the main agreement, subject to the proviso that there will be subsequent negotiations to sort of flesh out the more problematic political provisions, which were left off for a different day, noting that this would probably bog down negotiations. So they sort of parked the agreement for addressing this pressing global problem. It is the first SDG target as well to be met through a multilateral binding agreement. So all parties that would in principle accept this instrument would be required to comply with its provisions. It is also the first WTO agreement to focus on the environment, as I have already mentioned. Next slide, please. Okay, so just this is a map which represents the status of the WTO AFS today. We need about 2/3 of all WTO members to accept this instrument before it would enter into force. And currently, there are only 110 acceptances. So we are, sorry, we need 110 acceptances, but we are currently at just 61. So we are still some ways off, but there is some hope that there would certainly be a domino effect of acceptances. And indeed, during the last FC13 earlier this year, there were several states which sort of threw in their hat and said they would accept it. So it's hopefully it's a pleasant form of contagion that there will be other states that will follow suit. Next slide, please. Okay, so there, as I mentioned, there's an ongoing process for the adoption of additional provisions on fisheries subsidies. And this is as regards a prohibition on subsidies contributing to overcapacity and overfishing. If you notice, overcapacity and overfishing are terms which were found in SDG 14.6. These are actually technical in nature and were the subject of intense debates throughout the life of the negotiation process. These were also two terms where no agreement was found for purposes of the adoption of the main AFS. So this was one of the issues that was parked. So now we are currently trying to understand what exactly is meant by overcapacity and overfishing, what subsidies actually facilitate these behaviors and activities, and who would be most liable in the event that this actually, this discipline, or who would be most affected. There are other parked issues which are of highest concern, especially for Southeast Asian countries who are primarily lower middle income to middle income countries. This is regarding special and differential treatment for developing country members, including the least developed countries, or LDCs, as identified by the United Nations. And then finally, there's an ongoing process for discussing notification and transparency requirements, because this, of course, if taken to the extreme, can be extremely burdensome, but in any case is a necessary aspect of any compliance treaty. Next slide, please. Okay, so going into the treaty, the AFS itself, there are three main discipline areas under the WTO AFS. So there are now in place prohibition on subsidies to vessels or operators engaged in illegal, unreported, or unregulated fishing. People tend to conflate the term IUU fishing, kind of forgetting that these represent three entirely different behaviors. And the AFS, by reference, adopted the Food and Agriculture Organization's definition of IUU fishing, which actually is non-binding in nature, but has become to be customarily accepted by practically every instrument, both binding and non-binding, insofar as the definition of IUU fishing is concerned. And then this is something that many coastal nations have already also subsequently adopted in their estimated regulation. So subsidies that would be given to vessels or operators that have had a history or a track record of IUU fishing, or are in fact in the act of doing IUU fishing, will not be allowed. Then there's fishing on overfished stock. So there are actual indicators that tell you when a stock is overfished. So I won't go into the science or the calculation of it, but suffice to say that this is an objective standard. The third is fishing on unregulated high seas, primarily in shared fishing areas where perhaps no RFMO, Regional Fisheries Management Organization, is operating. Again, these are just the discipline areas that are found in the main WTO AFS, but in no way does it limit the discussions for the ongoing additional provisions, which focus more on overcapacity and overfishing. When the WTO AFS was actually first adopted, there was a lot of criticism about how it is actually an empty document. It does not exactly pinpoint which behaviors or what specific acts require disciplining, and then it also doesn't really give a provision that Some countries are more developed, while others are not. And of course, this will hit them differently, given that. Next slide, please. Okay, so what exactly is the relevance of the WTO AFS on Southeast Asia, given the topic of this morning's panel? I will limit my comments to three things. First, the effect and beneficial subsidies for development. Sorry, that should be second. Second, the invocation of peace clauses. And third, the application to disputed maritime areas. Just on the first point, the effect and beneficial subsidies for development, I mentioned earlier that not all subsidies are automatically bad, especially when a country is a developing country with aspirations to sort of go on a path of development. There tends to be a need to support fledgling industries that would otherwise not be able to carry out activities which would be otherwise be too costly for them to do. And this is particularly true of countries with a significant portion of their fisheries to be small scale in nature or are subsistence based. And that's the case really for many ASEAN member states. So subsidies would not be for the purpose of growing an industry for commercial purposes, but actually letting people live. It is as simple as that. So that would be the sense of what a beneficial subsidy might be. But in the AFS and the proposed subsequent amendments, there has to be a distinction as regards this, and I will show later that there is indeed some distinction, but not entirely a perfect distinction. Next slide, please. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about this concept of a peace clause. So like I said, in the AFS, there is much mention about how we are to treat developing countries, particularly the least developed countries. By the way, in the world of WTO, this notion of developing, developed, least developed is a highly controversial issue. Why? Because in the WTO realm, this notion or this labeling is self-declared, meaning you as a country would assess for yourself if you are developing or developed. And this label, self-labeling, comes with consequences in terms of how you might be required to comply with particular instruments. I set aside LDCs because unlike the label developing versus developed, LDCs actually are formally identified by the United Nations ECOSOC based on a set of criteria. So they're saying that this whole process for graduating LDCs into developing country status. But for the moment, it's important to note that for purposes of the WTO, we are still following a track where it's a country who identifies itself to be a developing country. There is still no definitive criteria. And this is particularly important if you're talking about the implementation of an instrument that proposes to discipline harmful behavior. If a country says that they are developing, certain carve-outs will be made or accommodated because of the fact that maybe they're developing, maybe they need these subsidies for developmental purpose, like I said, this beneficial or good subsidies, like I said. But what if you have a situation where you have a country like China, as I mentioned earlier, self-declares to be a developing country despite being the second largest economy in the world, the #1 fishing fleet in the world, #1 distant water fishing fleet? It means that the carve-out provisions, meaning restricting the full implementation of the disciplines in the WAFS, would not apply in full to China, a self-declared developing country. You can imagine how that might be problematic if indeed many Southeast Asian countries, for example, are feeling the pinch of Chinese fishing fleets who are, in fact, we could say, already taking more than is their fair share of a shared common pool resource. I also draw your attention to the fact that the WTO AFS structure is quite simple. If you read the treaty itself, it will show you that it's structured as having a general prohibition plus a peace clause. Peace in the sense that we are going to allow developing countries and developed countries to have sort of a reprieve, or rather leeway in subscribing and complying with the discipline. So it's usually a time-bound carve-out of the application of the discipline. Next slide, please. So a sample peace clause in the WTO AFS is this. For a period of 2 years from the entry into force of the agreement, subsidies granted or maintained by developing country members, including LDC members, up to and within the EEZ, shall be exempt from player in subsidization and the biggest fisher in the world, being told that, okay, you don't have to comply just yet because you are developing, so to speak, and operating in an area within the EEZ. And note again, or remember again, based on the discussions of my colleagues in this panel, that the delineation of EEZs within within Southeast Asia, the South China Sea in particular, is not straightforward. What does that mean? It means, in principle, that a country like China would need not subscribe to these disciplines, assuming they actually accept this instrument, and I think they did, because of this admittedly self-serving claim of being developing, and because there is a lack of clarity as to what might constitute being within their EEZ in the South China Sea. Immediately, you can sort of see the non-traditional security implication of this sort of ambiguity in my part of the world. Next slide, please. All right, okay, actually before I go to that slide, I just want to also mention two additional benefits of what you would, a developing country or an LDC might get out of the WTO AFS. First, other countries are obliged under this instrument to exercise due restraint in raising matters against them. So this means that if you have a developing country which presumably is in violation of any of the prohibitions and disciplines in the WTO AFS, you can't call it out. In other words, you can't say that they are outrightly violating the treaty because you have to give them leeway because they're a developing country and give them the benefit of the doubt that it's perhaps for a developmental purpose. So any criticism that would be raised against them, at least based on a broad read of this provision, should be constructive rather than punitive or critical in nature. So in other words, it's not a free pass per se, but more of an extreme tolerance for behaviors of developing countries. Another benefit that the developing country or an LDC would get is that they would be provided with technical assistance and capacity building to facilitate the implementation of the WTO AFS. Actually, post 2022, so after the AFS was signed, Fish Fund was established within WTO, and you had developed countries funding it voluntarily, granting sums of money for the purpose of sort of giving technical assistance to developing and LDCs so that they would be in a better position to comply. So it's sort of a way to help out. If you are a self-declared developing country, you would theoretically be able to tap into this shared fund, which would be used or allocated. There aren't very clear guidelines at the moment as to prioritization of who may access, but in any case, it stands available for any developing or developing country or LDC. All right, so just now this slide talks about the special and differential treatment in the proposed draft additional provisions. So like I said, this is still very much a moving text. No agreement was had this year, and perhaps next year or the year after that we'll get some more traction as to certain provisions. But I just want to draw your attention to the fact that now the purpose of this additional provision is to actually spell out what is meant by overcapacity and overfishing. And there's very clear carve-outs for LDCs in particular, meaning this provision will not apply to them up until the time that they graduate from LDC status as noted by the United Nations ECOSOC. So the peace clause that is included in the additional provisions has to do with the fact that, and you can see here, I put a block of text here for you to read, it really is more generous, I guess, now because of the extreme lobbying that was done during the negotiation process by developing countries. Now, developing country members, if this text is adopted, may grant or maintain subsidies if its share of the annual global volume of marine capture production does not exceed 0.8%. This is an interesting provision because it's meant to hit specific parties who self-declare as developing countries, even if they, as we mentioned, are actually quite a big player in the fishing industry. So it's very interesting because without naming names, it might affect certain countries outright because of this cap on activity. So you may be developing, but you're also highly industrialized, at least as fishing is concerned. That means you would not be exempt from complying with the provisions. You are not developing for per se for purposes of the exemption. And then there's also a or fishing-related activities that are primarily for low-income, resource-poor, or livelihood in nature. So it means that there seems to be more favorable provisions now for recognizing, again, this common but differentiated responsibility in the difference of perspectives of countries. So it's good, actually. The draft is much better than the original agreement. But again, this is something for us to continue observing because it's nowhere near the finish line. Next slide, please. And on this
Sorry, my apologies. Due to time constraints, I would like to kindly ask you for your brief statement. My apologies, we don't have enough time as we have faced a number of technical difficulties. We apologize for that. However, in 7 minutes we have another panel, and as such, I would kindly ask you to for your brief statements. My apologies for all the technical difficulties that we have faced today.
and thankfully, I'm at my very last slide. One more slide, please. So this is, I just wanted to just make a quick note about how it also specifically applies to disputed maritime areas in the South China Sea. The premise of these existing disputes is that there appears to be some sides, or some individuals, or some parties which try to obfuscate clear legal demarcations in the water. In other words, try to subvert the application of international binding legal agreements, the UNCLOS in particular, which is the constitution for the oceans and to which practically all countries subscribe. Of course, there are no double exceptions to this, but in any case, this is primarily the law that mostly governs in the South China Sea. Due to competing territorial and maritime claims, it makes it difficult to say who owns what. Or at least to the minds of some, there is some confusion there. And if we interplay that with the treaty, it makes it potentially difficult, for example, to determine if there's IUU fishing. Because a coastal state might say, look, this vessel is in violation of our domestic rules, therefore you are illegally fishing under FAO definitions. But then you have another party come and say, no, they're not, because that's our water, and we can't legally define illegal fishing if there's consent from the flag state of the vessel. That is interesting because then it might trigger potentially a dispute resolution process under the AFS. However, and this is, I guess, the final thought that I will leave the room with, is that even if there may be issues about territorial premises which would undermine the full application of the WTO AFS, according to the treaty, they will adopt a hands-off attitude to this. So in the situation I just described, wherein one coastal state says that there's IU fishing, flag state, control your vessel, don't give subsidies, the flag state might say, well, no, bring us to a dispute settlement, we don't care, because to our mind, that's our waters and there's no illegal fishing. If a dispute settlement body is indeed constituted under the provisions of the WAFS, this issue would not be tabled for dispute resolution. There being a provision there in the treaty which states that anything that must be decided based on a resolution or a ruling on existing territorial issues would be off limits for the dispute settlement process. The issue has to be ventilated elsewhere. So it seems like the most sensible thing to do, right? But then again, the ultimate result is that there's no disciplining that's happening. In other words, there is no value to the instrument if you cannot apply it because protests premise on a territorial dispute. So I think I will stop there and thank you very much, and apologies as well for my end for all the technical issues. Thank you.
We apologize. We have attempted to resolve everything. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we will not have a Q&A session. That's unfortunate. If you have any questions, please send them to us, and we can send them to the speakers.
Or with me. I'm in the room.
Thank you to our panelists for their insightful contributions and to our audience. Today's discussion has highlighted the importance of collaborative efforts and effective governance in addressing maritime security challenges in Southeast Asia. As we conclude, let's remember the stability and prosperity of the region's maritime domain depend on our collective commitment to upholding the principles of the law and the sea and fostering regional cooperation. Thank you once again for joining us. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to the student volunteers. years. Thank you to our panelists, and we look forward to continue this important